Hi, I'm Angela Kavanaugh, the Executive Director of CAI. I would like to welcome all of our attendees and thank our partners, the Board of Directors and CAI team for today's program. A few announcements. This Friday, we have our next session of HOA Feud, and next Wednesday, September 9th, will be our next Wednesday webinar. A few housekeeping rules. Today, all participants will be muted. Please type your questions into the question box and be sure to name the panelists that you would like the question directed to. Managers, if you need a certificate, please email Jackie at Jacqueline, JACLYN, at CAI-NJ.org. And just another note, you must be in attendance for the entire program to qualify for a certificate. Today, our first speaker will be Martin Cavalier. Martin is an attorney at Becker who represents condominium and homeowner association cooperatives and other residential homeowners as general counsel and in complex and commercial litigation, with an emphasis on construction and real estate related claims. Today, he will be discussing conducting board meetings. Welcome, Martin. Martin, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Can't hear you, Martin.
There we go.
There we go.
It said I was still muted by the organizer. I hit unmute, but it was still not unmuting me for some reason. Sorry about that, everyone. So thank you, Angela, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone at CAI for organizing this program today. I know we're all living in a different world these past couple of months, and so one of the topics that has routinely come up amongst our clients, board members, property managers, is the impact that this pandemic is having on conducting open meetings. And do we still have to have open meetings? If we have to have open meetings, how do we do them? What should they look like? What can we exclude from an open meeting? Can we exclude anything from an open meeting? Are some of the types of questions we've been getting. So I'll start with the first slide here. And I think everyone knows this outside the pandemic that all meetings of a governing board for a community association at which binding votes are going to be taken must be open to the membership. Now, it doesn't mean in executive session you can't take a straw vote just to gauge how all the board members feel about a particular topic. But in order for that vote, for example, to approve a contract to be valid, it needs to be done at an open meeting, meaning open to the membership, where they have the ability to attend. The governor's executive orders that have been put in place throughout this pandemic don't alter those requirements. They simply preclude, in most instances, from holding those open meetings in person. For example, if you take a look at Executive Order 173, that reduced indoor gatherings to a maximum of 25 people. I think previously it may have been 100 or so, and he put it back down to 25 people. Executive Order number 161 increased outdoor gatherings to a maximum of 500 people. So could you have your meetings in person at this point if you wanted to? Sure, yes, you could have an outdoor meeting or as long as it was less than 500 people, and you could have an indoor meeting as long as it was less than 25. However, I think everyone on this call probably knows with the insurance considerations and particularly the lack thereof surrounding this pandemic, we still recommend that you do not conduct the open meeting, meaning live in person. You should be doing this virtually at this point. So I'm going to go on to my next slide if it lets me click. Not. There we go. Conducting virtual open meetings. So under the law, you are permitted to hold open meetings via a conference call. You could use something like Zoom or GoToMeeting like we're using today. Some communities even have the ability to do closed circuit television. So long as the members of the association can attend, and that means view or listen in real time, that would qualify as an open meeting. However, I think it largely is going to depend on the number of members you have in your community as to how you're going to conduct or how you're going to go about your open forum or, the Q&A session that you might usually have. Obviously on Zoom, if you have, I think once you get out over about 20 people or so, it becomes very difficult with everyone talking over one another. So one thing is, you're allowed to set up something where, you can have some participation of the members in the meeting or a public comment session. But, one question we've been asked is, are you required to do that? The answer is no, you're not required to allow it. However, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, particularly if this is something you've always done, this open forum or the Q&A. The better solution is to come up with some alternative ways in which you can conduct your Q&A or conduct your open forum, in an orderly fashion. You could do things like submitting questions via email. You could do both prior to, during, and after the meeting. For smaller communities, I think you can permit live questions. I've had success in doing that. Like I said, as long as it's less than 20 or 30 people, I've had success in having the people log into Zoom and just having the questions done that way. Zoom and others have a Q&A function or a chat function that you could also use. And then the other thing you could do is simply, after the meeting's over, have people submit their questions to management, and then you could work to get them back answers in a reasonable amount of time thereafter. So our exceptions to the open meeting requirements are the same as they always have been, and I think everyone probably largely understands what these are. You're talking about being subject to attorney-client privilege, anticipated litigation, contract negotiations, privacy considerations, employment, promotion, discipline, or dismissal of an officer or employee of the association, and then your executive work session, so long as no binding votes are taken. There are no additional exceptions to open meeting requirements as a result of the pandemic. Your usual exceptions, however, still exist. And this is a popular one. What about the email votes? Even in a pandemic, email votes in lieu of an open meeting are not permissible. There are actually, potentially severe consequences, and there's not always going to be severe consequences, but there are some if you fail to conduct an open meeting. Actions by the board could be declared invalid or unenforceable, and the Department of Community Affairs has some authority to seek injunctive relief and even impose penalties on the association. So it's important to make sure that you're not taking votes via email. Again, you could take a straw vote via email. If there was an emergent circumstance, it might be necessary to take action and ratify a decision at the next open meeting. But the action you take should only be done to the extent necessary to abate the emergent condition, and you should always, always, always consult legal counsel before doing so. So with that, I'm free and available to answer any questions. I can do that now if time permits. If not, here's my email address. You are absolutely all welcome and invited to email me any questions about the presentation or anything else that might be on your mind, during this pandemic, some issue that may come up for you. So again, thank you to CAI, and thank you for everyone here joining us today.
Okay, the first question, a lot of decisions have to be made that require a vote, but do they all have to be made in an open meeting?
So again, if you are taking a vote that is going to result in some binding action, you are voting on a resolution, you are voting to approve a contract, you are voting to approve the expenditure of the association's funds. Yes, those need to be done in an open meeting. Now, there may be certain exceptions to those types of things. So, I would need these issues, like anything in the law, are highly fact sensitive. The general rule of thumb is if you're taking a vote, it should be done in an open meeting. That may not always be the case. So if you have a fact specific question, make sure you're always checking with your legal counsel on that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If an emergent repair is needed, do we have to conduct an open meeting to approve the expenditure?
Yeah, and that was one of the things I touched on a bit. If it's emergent, meaning it's affecting life and safety or the habitability of a residence, for example, no, you should contact, fire, whether it's fire or plumbing or what have you, and take care of it, but only to the extent necessary to abate the emergency, meaning only to the extent necessary to stop the leak and stop the formation of mold and do the cleanup that you need to do. Should you then approve fully reconstructing the damage without an open meeting? No, you should not. But everything that you need to do up and until fully abating the emergent condition, yes, you can do that and then ratify that decision. And again, I think it's always important to stress, consult with your legal counsel to make sure that you're not going too far.
Okay, and I believe the last question, are there any penalties for failing to hold an open meeting?
Yeah, so there's a potential for penalties. I went over the one slide on that, and it will depend on the extent of the action that was taken, but it could result in a fine. For example, you could get a cease and desist letter, and a court could declare the action that was taken invalid and unenforceable if you fail to hold an open meeting. For example, if you adopted rules and regulations via resolution, but you didn't do that at an open meeting and somebody challenged that, a court's going to rule that unenforceable and invalid.
Okay. All right. Those are the only questions so far. If anyone thinks of any other questions for Martin, please feel free to put them in the question box and we'll readdress them at the end. Okay. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, 1 second. Next, we have Mike coming up. Just give us 1 second. Jackie?
Yeah, Mike, if you could just accept the webcam request that I'm sending, please.
Just did.
Okay.
Not loading, huh?
And just bear with us. It sometimes takes a minute. Here he is.
There he is. There he is. Okay.
Face for radio.
Okay. Welcome, Mike. All right, everyone. Mike is the branch president of Associa Community Association Management of New Jersey, is a current long-term member of CAI New Jersey's Legislative Action Committee and its former chair. He also was CAI New Jersey's chapter president in 1999. Ooh,
1999. It's not that bad.
And you were a baby, and is a current member of the Montclair State University adjunct faculty, teaching a full semester course on association management. Today, he will be discussing organizing board meetings. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Angela, and welcome everybody. I'm actually going to briefly talk about meetings, both board meetings and elections, and supplement largely what Martin has already covered. And I'm going to go through it quickly because we think it makes some sense to spend a few minutes this afternoon, talking about the recently adopted executive order from the governor on gym reopenings. And I know Martin's been on top of that as well, so I'm sure he'll join me in commenting on that. So again, let me talk first about board and election meetings and try to offer a few thoughts beyond what Martin has already covered. Next slide. So I wanted to offer some practical tips on conducting virtual meetings. I think Martin did a very nice job talking about the legalities of it all, but when you get in the trenches, how do you make it work? Next slide. So the biggest lesson I've learned from the beginning, and it's not just because of my relative tech unsavviness in running a meeting, but regardless of who's running the meeting or running the Zoom platform or running the GoToMeeting platform, you really ought to try to have somebody other than the person conducting the meeting handling the management of the process. And when I say management of the process, I'm talking about, people who can't get on, people who you can't hear them. I mean, similar to the problems and the glitches that we've had today, they're inevitable in every one of these. And if the person who's trying to conduct the meeting is also the guy trying to deal with Harry saying, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I can't get on. It makes for a very disruptive meeting and frankly distracts the meeting chair from conducting the business in a logical way. Next slide. So the other thing that I've learned throughout all this, and I think most of us have, is that there are some benefits to conducting these meetings virtually, that when the pandemic is over and we no longer have to do it virtually, we can show up again. Maybe we don't need to show up for every meeting. And why would that be? Well, first of all, we have some board members who either work or they're busy, and they would prefer to not have to, maybe they can go to work and log in at 8 o'clock in the morning from their office in Manhattan, rather than come home and wolf down a quick piece of pizza before an 8 o'clock meeting at night and get home at 11 o'clock. It also reduces manager travel time and stress. I mean, I think most of us in this business, would say that the toughest part of our job is that, we don't go home at 5 o'clock. That's when we're just preparing for the meeting at 7:30. And for those, those with a couple of meetings per week, it becomes a stressful part of the job. And if some of these could be done during the day or in a virtual way that reduces travel time, it's helpful. And finally, it allows the participation of snowbirds. So if you've got active adult communities where, a third of your community may be in Florida or down south for the winter, if you're having in-person meetings, they're effectively disenfranchised. This gives them an opportunity to participate that they otherwise would not have. So obviously, we're not going to continue this forever at 100%, but I think there is a pretty good argument for a mix as we go forward. Next slide. And just, I wanted to make a quick comment on the Radburn regs and election meetings in particular. Next slide. Those of you who may probably know that CAI has filed suit challenging the Radburn regulations that were adopted in early May or mid-May of this year. We had hoped initially that the DCA would voluntarily agree to stay or not put in effect those regulations while our legal challenge is pending. We thought that they would consent to do that voluntarily. We learned about a week ago they will not. So as a result, part of our legal challenge now is not only to throw out all the regulations, but we're now asking the court to stay their effectiveness effective now, pending the legislation, pending the litigation, however. But until that happens, they're in effect. So we got to live with them. Next slide. So just a few thoughts on how to deal with elections in particular. And I know Martin's lived in this world too. And when we're dealing with virtual and, overlaid by Radburn, it creates some real challenges. So, Radburn says that if you're going to have a general proxy, you must also have an absentee or directed proxy ballot. But how do we deal with general proxies when we're having a virtual meeting? Ordinarily, somebody gives us a general proxy and says, give my vote to Harry. And when Harry shows up at the front door of the clubhouse, we give him a ballot, not only for himself, but for his proxy. Well, how do we do that when there is no clubhouse meeting? Nobody's coming into the room, and we typically are not opening any of these things until the night of the meeting when it's too late to give Harry the ballot. Frankly, and I'd be interested, at some point in Martin's thoughts, I'm a believer that we're trying very hard to discourage general proxies because it's just impractical. And since everybody is getting an absentee or mail ballot, they have the ability to vote without designating anybody to vote on their behalf. How do we count votes publicly? Part of the Radburn reg. We're supposed to open up all the ballots now, which are anonymous, such that the membership can see what we do. But again, we're not live in a room. We're not sitting around a table where they can look over our shoulder. What we've done is we have either a Zoom or a GoToMeeting platform, and we literally have somebody on the screen opening up the ballots and that screen is accessible by a GoToMeeting or Zoom platform for anybody who wishes to watch that exciting process happen in front of them. And once again, what to do if we have an insufficient number of candidates to fill available seats, again, in a virtual meeting context. Ordinarily, we would move forward with the meeting and we would solicit nominations from the floor at the time of the meeting and do whatever we had to get a full complement to run. That's tougher to do now when we've got a virtual meeting where it's a little bit tougher to put the call out for candidates from the floor. So those are my thoughts as to how some tough issues. So off the PowerPoint now, I again want to just highlight for everybody who may not be paying attention, or perhaps you've been paying attention but you're not sure where it ended up. Where do we stand on gym reopenings? So last week, Governor Murphy announced early in the week that he was allowing what he called health clubs to open as of June 1st, yesterday. He followed that up with an executive order, number 181, that obviously put some meat on the bones and said, if you want to open your health club, here's what you have to do. And for those of you who went through the pool opening process, it was a very similar process. First, he announced it, then he put in place an executive order, and then in the same way as he did with pools, he had his Department of Health last Thursday issue very detailed regulations and requirements as to what you must do if you do want to open your gym facility. So where we are now is there's an executive order and a Department of Health set of guidelines that have very stringent requirements. One other thought, and it's important, the first question was, well, does this executive order 181 even apply to us, since it refers to health clubs and it doesn't specifically refer to gyms within facilities like ours? And there was a prior executive order 157 that did in fact specifically refer to us. So the thought was, well, they knew how to spell condo, and if they didn't in 181, maybe they didn't intend to cover us. We've now gotten confirmation from the Governor's Council's office that it was their intention to cover gyms within community associations, so we are covered. So what does 181, the combination of 181 and the Department of Health regs say? And I'm only going to tick off a few things. As with pools, it's hard to open them. And in fact, it's worse in several respects. Number one, it requires you to have personnel available at the gym facility to do a number of things. Number one, you got to take the temperature of every person who comes to use it. Number two, you have to check them in as they enter. Number three, you have to have somebody who's going to monitor compliance with the distancing requirements, which I'll mention in a moment. And four, you have to have somebody who's going to sanitize each piece of equipment after each use and is going to sanitize what they call high touch areas at least 3 times a day. So I think it's fair to say that you've got to have a full-time person present on the premises at the gym while you're open. It requires that the occupancy, that it can't be occupied more than 20% of normal maximum occupancy, and 6-foot distancing between each piece of equipment. It requires a reservation system to make sure that we don't have a line at the door. It requires certain signage to deal with behavioral requirements, and it also requires the assessment of the ventilation system in the gym to make sure that it is adequate. But it doesn't say what adequate is. So, and you couple all of that with the same issue that those of you who dealt with pools are aware of, and that is the likelihood is that we don't have insurance in the event of a claim by somebody who says, I use the gym, and as a result of my use of the gym, you did something wrong, and I now have coronavirus. So our advice certainly is, before any decision to open is made, quantify all these things, make sure you can do all these things, and then talk to your lawyer, talk to your insurance agent, and in this case, talk to your HVAC contractor as well to make sure that you've got all bases covered before the decision is to open. Thank you, Angela.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. We have a few questions. from the audience. The first one, at board meetings, votes by the board are taken before questions are entertained. Must board meetings be conducted in that order?
So, one of the things that's curious about the open meetings law that's existed forever, and I'm sure Martin's got a perspective on this, is it does not guarantee the right of the membership. It guarantees the right of the membership to attend the meeting, but not to participate in the meeting. So I think most well-run associations find it fairly obnoxious to say, welcome to the meeting, sit in the back and shut up and we'll tell you when it's over. So most associations do provide an opportunity for comment from the membership. I have seen that comment come after the train has left the station and after the board has made a decision. I've seen others that do, particularly on important decisions, have the membership have an opportunity to ask questions before the gavel comes down. I think obviously the opportunity to comment before a decision is made makes it more meaningful, but it requires somebody capable of managing the meeting so it doesn't get out of hand.
Okay, next question. Can the board decide to extend terms of trustees if there are not enough candidates to fill the slate?
Martin's in a better position to answer that than me. I always thought the answer was no. You have a meeting. I mean, I think the practical answer is until you replace them, by definition, their term continues. But I don't think you can say, something we tried, we didn't get a quorum, and therefore, you've got another 1-year term. But I think, when I talk to lawyers in the field that I respect, they seem to think that perhaps is okay, and maybe they can be appointed to the board for that term, even because we didn't succeed in electing them. Martin, do you have a thought on that?
Can you hear me? I know I'm not on camera, but can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be community specific most likely, because assuming in most communities the bylaws are not going to address that issue. What's going to happen in that scenario is you're going to want to try to continue to reach a quorum for a reasonable period of time, right? And if you can't, well, actually, this is a little bit different. I think the fact scenario you gave is you don't have enough people running.
I
Beginning of
missed
the fact scenario. Was that the beginning of the fact scenario, Angela? I'm sorry.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's a little bit different. If you don't have enough people running, right, then obviously whoever is running would be put on the board. And can the board then have the ability to appoint somebody? I would say at that point, if you're looking to appoint somebody, you might as well hold a special election to avoid that appointment later being declared, invalid. You hold a special election just for that one person and they can take that empty seat. If you run into the scenario, I think what Mike was maybe thinking about was where you can't reach quorum, and can the new board members or can continued board members continue to serve on the board, you couldn't reach quorum. My position on that is largely you would continue for a reasonable time to try to get quorum, right? And if you still can't get quorum despite reasonable attempts, my advice would be allow that person to serve on the board and continue to operate. A challenger to that person sitting on the board is not very likely to be successful in a court of law. A community association needs to have a board. They need to operate. They need to be governed by members. And if no one else stepped up and it was an uncontested election and no one else stepped up for that position, I just don't see it likely that a judge is going to say, yeah, they're not on the board and declare everything that the board has done in the past as being unenforceable. I think it's a very, very small risk. So again, I wouldn't take that and run with it. I would sit down with your and see, is it the same factual scenario?
Makes sense.
Okay. All right. There are 2 other questions, but I believe you've already dealt with them. But you may want to, just in case you can add anything, so I'll just run through them quickly. How should whoever is running a virtual meeting reconcile the need for them to actively participate in the meeting with dealing with the technical problems that inevitably come up?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I have somebody else do it. And if you can, it's not always possible. And I've seen people juggle it well. I'm not one of them. But they really are 2 separate functions that ought to be separated. Okay.
And the last one, how does the association in virtual setting comply with the new Radburn regs requirement to count ballots publicly? Again, I think you already answered that.
Yeah. Do it on the TV screen and let them watch.
All right, and that's it for now. Again, if anyone has any other questions for Mike or Martin, please feel free to enter them into the question box.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Next, we have Joe Bonafide. Joe is the president. Welcome, Joe. Joe is the president of Technocality Security Solutions. Joe started Technocality in 2002 after retiring from NYPD as a second-grade detective, and has been installing, servicing, and maintaining security systems for over 35 years. Technocality services New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and DC. Today, Joe will be discussing temperature scans. Welcome, Joe.
Hello there. Thank you, Angela and team, and congrats on your position. Awesome.
Thank you.
So we're just going to talk about temperature scans and the easiest way to assist in allowing businesses to open safely during the pandemic. One of the things that the temperature scans do is, the cameras themselves. I'm just going to let this play just for a second, and then I'll just stop it. Basically, they give you the ability of walking through a throttled area, whether it's the front door of a building, whether it's the front door of a clubhouse, and it gives you the ability of scanning each individual very quickly. I mean, clubhouses, pool areas, a thermal scan with a thermometer would be more than sufficient. But the thermal cameras right now just give you the ability of high traffic areas. It's effective at screening for detecting, obviously elevated skin temperature, non-contact, and the method really is within 0.3% accuracy. So a lot of times what will happen with these, you can have them tied into different systems, whether it's a strobe light, whether it's it sends someone an email or a notification of someone, a guard that is, taking care of other, other components or other, registering other people, and it could stop them in their tracks. They have other things like magnetometers where, it looks like basically a walk-through metal detector at an airport, and it's got a thermal scanner on it. And basically, you walk up to it. There's a little footprint on the floor where you would step, and in about 2 seconds, it'll give you the green light that you go, or red light that, hey, you need some further investigation of you have an elevated temp. What is that from? You just ran from the train station. It just started raining. You ran from your car. But at least this way, it could, prevent that person who may be infected or has an elevated temp, maybe not related to COVID or the pandemic, but it gives them the ability of isolating that people off to the side so others can go through. The temperature scans themselves can be integrated with access control, whether it's a door. So if someone comes up, they get scanned. Many of them have facial recognition, and as they're identified, it looks at their credentials as if it was a key fob or an access control card, and grants them access via a door, a barrier, a pedestal, something like that. Besides that, walking through, besides that, a lot of the kiosks now have the ability of looking to see if there's a mask, if they're wearing a mask. So a person comes up, tests their temperature, that's fine. They're wearing a mask, they have a green light, they go. So a few different things that would allow them, or would stop them from entering a location would be the elevated temp, or if they weren't wearing a mask. you know, there's a lot of different types of products that are out there, but, you know, we're finding that a lot of these companies, these businesses, you know, are getting so many conflicting stories from the government, whether it's, yes, we're opening now. You heard them talking about Friday, they're going to allow in-person dining, I think up to 25%, I believe, in New Jersey. So it changes on a regular basis. So that's, you know, when it comes to that, it's really just dependent upon what state you're in and what the criteria is. One of the other things for fast deployment, so train station, bus, subway, airports. So there are other components that will allow you to get through this facility or this choke point a little bit quicker, and you could basically look at several different people at the same time and see if their temperature was elevated. One of the things with we talked about access control, but there is the DeepMind NVR. So all of these tie into you know, camera systems. Well, not all of them, most of them do. The ones that actually the ones that we've been installing. So basically, you have an NVR, network video recorder, camera system, and it basically has an output where thermal camera connects to it on a tripod, or we've had specifically made some very nice kiosks depending upon what building type it was going into, and it would connect to that. So the output of that camera can go to someone off-site. It can go to a monitoring station that's looking at this in real time. And then besides that, it's being recorded. So you could go back if for some reason you missed something, or if you want to see, because the actual temperature reading would be above that person's head, good, bad, or otherwise. Green, go. It gives you, you know, it's has not met that threshold that's set. Obviously, when it's red, then alarms go off, whether it's internal, whether it's emails, or whether it's a barrier that comes down to stop them from going through. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about it, but you know, we found that in areas where it's a clubhouse, you've had to, you know, close off these side doors so no one can enter. They can only enter to a specific area, and it's been working for us. So, I mean, other than that, there's some other things besides the thermal scan, and obviously a questionnaire. I mean, we've complemented cameras, thermal scans, handheld, and then from there, I mean, just a brief questionnaire. Some of the kiosks these days have a questionnaire right on the screen. So as you enter your name, they'll ask you a couple of questions that are relevant to that specific location. Once you answer them in a correct manner, then they proceed to let you through. I mean, other than that, let me get out of this. So as far as this goes, so this is what some of the cameras look like. Let me go back to that. So that's what some of the cameras look like. We ran through it pretty quick, but you know, basically, it just will assist in allowing you to get through in a quicker time frame. Let me just pull that up. Like that, and it allows you to do that. So let's move this over.
Okay. You want to unshare your screen, Joe? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, and there are actually two questions so far. First one, how accurate are temperature scans?
Yeah, so the temperature scans are plus or minus 0.3%. So it's definitely within the, you know, a range of you know, accuracy, which, you know, is looked at by, you know, a lot of different agencies. You know, it's got to be within a certain range in order for it to comply. So these specific ones are plus or minus actually 0.3. And then if they have a body calibrator, so what the body calibrator does, it looks at your whole body physique and not just your forehead, and it looks at the IR, the thermal imaging of your body, and that would get it down to an even lower. So it's actually 0.5 without the body calibrator, and with the body calibrator, it goes down to 0.3 to meet the initial screening requirements.
Okay, and this last question, I believe you already answered, but let's give it another shot. Can a temperature scan work in conjunction with access control locking the main entry door if your scan is negative?
Sure. So, you know, what we were talking about earlier is it can be a couple of different things, whether, you know, it would have to include either facial recognition, you either put your credentials in, and once you got a green light, it allows you to pass through to a door that may be locked, to a barrier, to a gate to get you through a specific area.
Okay, thanks. All right, Joe, that's all we have so far for you. If anyone else has questions, feel free to type them in. And next up, we're going to hear from Jason. Hey, Jason.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, welcome. Jason Ciavarro is Executive Vice President of Advanced Pavement Group. He has experience in the asphalt paving and concrete industry spanning 3 decades. He has become one of the most respected industry leaders across New Jersey and surrounding areas. He is a veteran of the Operation Enduring Freedom, having constructed airfields and roadways for American troops in Iraq and Kuwait. Jason lends his knowledge and expertise to many associations, often educating the public on exterior maintenance. Today, he will be discussing maintenance of streets and pavement. Welcome, Jason.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks, everybody. You know, I know we have a short window of time here, so I just want to touch upon several points that I think that we all need to be cognizant of. You know, and I think when we talk about asphalt maintenance and concrete, whether it's reconstruction or maintenance, everything is basically driven from our reserve studies, right? That's going to drive us to, are we implementing maintenance or are we going to be implementing the reconstruction? Many times I do find that these reserve studies are, you know, not always accurate to where, you know, the rubber hits the road, if you will. You know, they're there to set a schedule, and it doesn't mean that we're going to perform to that exact schedule. We might be over accelerated. We might get an extended duration of time. So, you know, so with that being said, you know, when do we know if we need to do maintenance or if we should be doing construction, right? We might be slated with the funds to go ahead and do a reconstruction project, but if the property is showing us signs that we can extend this and kick the can down the road, if you will, a little bit longer, because there are no complaints, there are no tire damage, there's no trip hazards on the property, and you know, we have this evaluation that's proving this, you know, why would we not do that? Well, I think the real question is, how do we do that? And I think having an evaluation process is incredibly important, right? So many of you may just send out an RFP, request for proposal, right? Saying, hey, we want to seal coat our roads, crack fill them, right? But are we looking at the storm drains, the storm water management? Are we looking to make sure that our bicycle safe grates are compliant? Are we looking at ponding, pooling areas, alligator cracking? I mean, I can go down this deep wormhole. I won't do that today, honey. You know, so I think when we look at an evaluation, it's really about having a component inventory in place. You know, because how often does a property manager change from one association to another? How are we passing this information along, you know, to the board, this board to that board, or to this manager to that manager? So I think a series of things, you know, maybe we ought to start looking at some drone inspections, right? Having a video recording of what that looks like, right? Not just from a standpoint of reconstructing, but identifying and allowing boards to see what does it look like today, what did it look like yesterday, and then if we can share that information amongst ourselves, we can make much better educated decisions. We can also evaluate what has been prescribed, right? If it was a maintenance, if it was a seal coat or a crack fill, how did it perform? You know, did it last 3 years like it was supposed to? You know, so we can identify shortfalls, we can identify, you know, how are we performing and what are we implementing? You know, so I think that's incredibly important. I think another thing I think folks need to understand is, you know, when do I know from a visual distress point that a pavement has reached its useful life, right? One of the key things that you can do is you can take a look and say, okay, once 30% of your area is failed, and what's the definition of failed, right? It could be extremely alligator, open potholes, things of such. Once we reach that, patching maintenance dollars doesn't make sense because your maintenance dollars cost here and your reconstruction dollars are way down here. Obviously, we need greater funding dollars to implement a reconstruction, but having this information in inventory, sharing it, you know, and working with your engineer that provided you with that reserve study, and then saying, how are we acting and how is our pavement behaving in regards to this, right? Because there's a proactive approach and a reactive approach. And we know that proactive dollars are definitely going to save you special assessments. It's going to give us greater curb appeal. It's going to allow our community to appreciate. You know, there's a lot of values that we can look at with that. Outside of that, you know, when it's reconstruction mode or even when it's maintenance mode, you know, I think one of the key things that we look at as either a board or a manager is we look at the dollars, but, you know, we got to measure apples to apples, right? So if an engineer is putting out a bid for a reconstruction, fantastic. Everybody's on the same playing field. It's well spelled out on what materials you're going to do, how you're going to navigate in the installation or reconstruction of the asphalt and concrete on a property. You know, every contractor is not created equal on the way that they implement, you know, and I think it's important that no matter who you sit with, you know, whether it's this company, that company, what have you, it's vitally important to find out what company best fits your association, because everybody that really is working in the space, I'm sure, is more than qualified, but who's the best fit for you? Who's going to understand what's important to you? What are the constraints, right? How do we walk through this from a phasing perspective? How do we communicate to the residents? You know, so these are just some of the things that I think I'd like you all to be aware of. You know, I know this isn't everybody's first rodeo, but with that being said, you know, I just want us all to take a better look, and it's even more challenging now with COVID. You know, we have everybody working remote, right? So we may not see problems that are underneath cars and what have you. So we got to figure out how do we really identify ourselves and be able to do that visual inventory of the property piece by piece, whether it's asphalt or concrete. You know, so with that, if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to go through.
No questions yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Can we bring, but
I'm the
maybe
last guy.
some may pop up. So let's bring everyone back, Jack.
Yeah. Great.
You've covered it all, Jason.
Yeah, you know, I come in hot and heavy.
Yeah, it's a lot of information. A lot of information, definitely.
Great. No, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. We actually have one other question for either Martin or Mike. If members voted, can the approval of the resolution then be presented at the open meeting? Who wants to take that one?
Can you read that back again, Angela? If members,
If members voted, can the approval of the resolution then be presented at the open meeting?
so typically, I'm not sure what type of resolution you're talking about here, but typically the members wouldn't vote on a resolution. That would be, you know, something that the board would do. The board would have authority to adopt rules and regulations, you know, governing the common elements. So what would happen is the board could discuss such a resolution in executive session, could go through drafts of such a resolution in executive session. But the moment that they want to adopt it, to be able to enforce it, that vote needs to officially take place in an open meeting.
Yeah, and Angela, if I could just add to that, and because again, the question's not clear, are they only talking about resolutions, or maybe they're talking about the resolution of an issue having been voted on by the board in a private session? I think what's important, I mean, the reality is a lot of stuff gets discussed behind closed doors. What I think is important is when the open meeting happens, it ought to be more than simply motion, second, and the board votes on something and doesn't give any insight as to why they're doing what they're doing. The idea is it's not supposed to be teed up to the point where where it's just a show. It's supposed to be a meaningful opportunity for the membership to understand not only what the board is doing, but why they're doing it.
Yeah, I think that's important clarification too, Mike, is that, you can have the discussions about a situation or an issue in executive session. It's the actual binding, vote that needs to be done in the open meeting. But if you want to avoid the headache that's going to follow, if all you do is go through the motions of, can I get a motion, approval, okay, passed, and then don't answer any questions about it, or don't give any introduction about what you're doing and why you're doing it, you're going to get a lot of pushback, whether, yes, you may have the authority to do it that way, but no one in the business, I would imagine, is going to recommend that you do it that way. You want to have some level of transparency, if nothing else, other than to, ensure the residents that you know what you're doing and they know what you're doing.
Okay. All right. We have a few minutes left. Do any of our presenters want to add anything? Any last thoughts before we end today's session? A lot of information. Thank you, everyone. Excellent. All right. If any of the attendees today have any other questions, if you think of them later on, please feel free to email me. You can email to info@CAI-NJ.org, and we will definitely get you in touch with the presenters. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Great day.
Thank you.